From the Chinese side, there's a continued commitment to opening up and also for mutual interest through trade.
First of all, through this CIIE, it has done two very important things. It has signaled the continuing willingness of China to be open to trade. This is the biggest import trade show, and it's unique. It's unique in the sense that there are not many countries that actually do trade shows for imports. And I think that is a phenomenal step, both for developing countries and for China's relationship with developing countries. And the second thing that's very important is what it signals for South-South trade, that China stands ready to welcome more imports from developing countries, but also encourage investment, encourage dialogue, encourage trade, and especially for the least developed countries.
So how is that likely to help your work, which is to support the least developed economies in the world?
It's so critical to recognize how important China is for the least developed countries. 25% of the exports from least developed countries come to China. That's 1/4 of their entire exports, which means that it does several things. It provides a marketplace for LDCs that isn't readily available elsewhere. The second thing it does is it increases their ability to diversify their markets, because most have also been commodity dependent developing countries. And as a result, they've been locked into some terms of trade which haven't necessarily worked for them. What this does is it allows them to diversify their markets, diversify their product base, enable them also to engage in innovation, to attract new investment, to develop new connections, and also to grow. And that's what makes it so important for LDCs.
We see more interaction between China and the United States in recent months, and leading up to the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, there are tremendous expectations that these powers should work together. What about your expectations?
Well, my hope, I don't know if I'd say expectations, but it's my hope that both sides, I think it's now fully understood and agreed that China and the US are both sides of the same coin, that they work symbiotically, that one success is the other's success. When we came in on yesterday, we were picked up in a Cadillac, made in China. Now, you can't get more American in terms of symbolism, but it is made in China. And that goes to show how important the partnership is, and the fact that both sides benefit from a strong trade agreement and trade arrangement.
What about for least developed economies?
Well, for least developed economies, what has been very clear from the beginning is that most of them have been commodity-dependent developing countries for so long. What we're trying to do is to work with them to increase investment in value addition, so that they no longer export just the raw primary commodities. They actually begin to move up the value chain. They begin to increase their ability to export, say, for example, instead of the pure cobalt or the pure mineral, they will be able to make widgets, which are intermediate goods, which then come into, say, the electric battery. And the thing with China is China's import fair, this whole expo, is so important because 50% of the world's exports are all actually in intermediate goods. And so if we can get the LDCs to move up the value chain, to engage in value addition, then that also encourages their growth and also is an input to China's economy.
So you are suggesting that both China and the United States should make gestures and actions to make this happen, and they need to do it in partnership.
It would be great, yes.
How do you see the trade discussion going in parallel with the climate discussion, as we are also heading for COP28?
Well, what's really interesting is that for the very first time at COP28, there's going to be a trade house. And that trade house will house the WTO, UNCTAD, ITC, and the ICC, which is the International Chambers of Commerce. And for the first time, we are going to present a unified front on the trade issues as they impact climate change and as climate change impacts trade. And we think that this is really groundbreaking, because for the first time there's a confluence of the two issues. As you said, you are saying they're parallel. Now they're actually meeting, which is a very, very powerful symbolic step that says we have to address both these issues in tandem. We can't keep talking at parallel points. both have to be talked about together. How does climate change impact trade, and how can trade be one of the solutions to climate change?
So now this is crucial because the Secretary General, I remember, of the United Nations has been said, this is though the most fragmented time we have seen in decades, but this is the time that we have to work together the most urgently over the past decades. So how do you see the least developing countries are helping themselves? Well, how do you see this South-South cooperation is likely to facilitate the voices of these developing countries and the developing countries as a whole?
Well, the South-South cooperation angle is really important because China, as a exponentially large developing country, is able to be a leader in the space. It provides technology. One of the good things about it is that it also provides information. Information for trade is one of the most critical areas. And so many countries, especially LDCs, have said, we don't have enough information. And so through that, we have actually had a global trade help desk, which is ITC, UNCTAD, WTO, creating a platform which actually was agreed to by the G20 in this last meeting to be enhanced because it is such an important player in enabling LDCs to access markets. But the other areas that we have been working on is the green transition. How do we help LDCs and other developing countries to make the green transition, to work with businesses to do climate smart agriculture, to look at recycling, look at their water management systems, look at solar energy or alternative energy to lower their production costs. These are all aspects that we're looking at. And then finally on digitalization. We have found that the biggest challenge for many companies is that they do not know how to use the digital framework for business. They know it personally, you know, they can send WeChat and so on, but when it comes to being able to utilize it for e-commerce, we've been doing training for them, we've been putting them on platforms. Alibaba, we have a partnership with Alibaba, and then we just signed another partnership with Google, ICC and ASEAN to help train them on how to utilize these platforms to increase their economic development, but also their exports.
Those are terrific news.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the case studies and examples could be spread.
Yes, precisely. They become, if we can have success, we're looking at 1,000 companies in the ASEAN group. And yes, and if we can use these as pilots, then we can utilize those examples to show how this can work and how it has worked for other companies. And this would be a great experiment in a way to use as a platform to enhance our ability to help others.
Right. At the time when there's tremendous change, we see different groupings of countries and economies. And of course, you're supporting the least developed economies, but among them, there are also different interest groups. So how do you, from your perspective, see these different groupings coming out? How to facilitate that their voice is being heard, but at the same time, the voices can also be linked to the global governance system that are in transition right now?
The world, I think, in the last century, this is the most fragmented and most multipolar world we've seen in a very long time. You know, there's the whole nearshoring and friendshoring and reshoring, and, you know.
And the list goes on.
Yes, exactly. And it's what I call strategic reglobalization, which is that the various nodes and power bases are shifting. It's like tectonic plates. And so eventually they will settle, but they're now trying to find their new normal. And frankly, that's completely normal. This is, you know, it's not unique. It is just that this is a period we're in and everybody's shifting. The developing countries, in my view, are what I call the canary in the coal mine. They're the ones who are going to signal that something is wrong. And when they signal that something is wrong, it's incumbent on the rest of the world to hear and to understand and to begin to readjust the international system to address those issues. The issues of debt, the issues of climate change, the issues of an unjust green transition and the barriers that will come about, say, with new regulations. the issues related to digital divide. The fact that so many, 3 billion people are still unconnected. So we can't talk about e-commerce if people are not connected. It's simple. So it's really important that we use this opportunity for the voice of these developing countries to be heard and to be translated into change, into looking at the international financial architecture and understanding why it hasn't worked and why development has been so uneven. And then looking at what are the solutions that we can come up with. How can we make this better? How can we adjust the international trading rules and system to actually create a more just society?